What another lovely day getting the opportunity to do some maintenance on my 150-gallon aquarium. I've pretty consistently given the advice to pull the plant out, trim it, and replant the tops. Now, I still believe, wholeheartedly, that's the best advice that I can give most people, but in between that, I do have to do actual just plain old plant trimming when they get too tall. Trimming like this when they get too tall gives an opportunity for most plants to send out side shoots. If you're talking about a stem plant that's growing up, you give it a trim, it's likely going to send out 2 side shoots. Now you can do this for a couple of times until it just gets too ugly, too messy, and it doesn't really maintain very much of an aquascape in my opinion. So at that point is when I recommend going back to pulling the whole plant out, trimming off all the tops, and putting them back in. This first plant we're looking at here is Diplodous diandra, which has started to grow kind of funky and wonky and is starting to shade out everything below on the bottom parts of the plant. So I'm actually having to remove a significant portion of this plant in order to maintain it to still grow down here in the front of the tank. Most of these tops will be moved and taken over to some other aquarium or even just replanted in this aquarium at some point in time. I'm just going to maintain them alive and hold them off to the side while this resprouts and starts to grow again. The reasoning for that is I do like to maintain and propagate most of the plants that I have so that I can have more than just what's growing in my tank on hand. Local people know that I have a tendency to just give away bags of plants, and that habit will continue, even though we do have to do it socially distanced. Driving past the house, throw the bags out the window. It seems like the best way to do it now, and just land them on your front lawn. So there's zero contact, definitely following the speed limit and not doing any donuts in the middle of the road though. Diplodous Octopus is our next nefarious character that's growing all the way to the top of the tank. As you guys know, this plant constantly growing like crazy, and I'm always having to trim it. So I do have quite a few videos trimming this plant, and let's just move right along. You guys know it grows too tall, you gotta trim it and hack it back. You might as well get an electric weed whacker or a gas-powered weed whacker, or maybe one of those tree trimmers for this plant, and go ahead and whack it back. Just go nuts. The next plant here is the Ciamensis, which is a pretty cool plant. I did a feature video on this just a little while ago, so you could check that out if you like. It does have a tendency to grow quite tall in my aquariums, as it's just doing pretty well. I mean, that's really the reality here. Grows all the way up to the top of the tank and then begins to shade out a lot of the other plants near it, around it, and all that stuff, which obviously is a problem if you have more than just this plant in the tank. To go through trimming here, you're basically just looking for a spot where you have side shoots sprouting and you are down low enough from the top of the tank to give yourself some opportunity for it to regrow and some time in between trimming. I've got about 16 inches of space here, and it seems like that's going to be enough for likely another month and a half or something like that before I have to come in and do a dramatic trim. At that point in time, I am going to pull the plant out from the substrate, trim off the tops, and replant them. The Ciamensis, I typically get 2 trims from it before I do have to remove it from the substrate and replant. The Diplodous at the beginning of the video, I never really have to replant, but I will after probably the 3rd trimming. Other plants aside, you still will have problems with this plant shading out the base of itself once it gets too tall, and you're going to have all these dead leaves down at the bottom that do need to be removed because you just have detritus breaking down in the tank. Now, in nature, that's not that big of a deal. It actually is part of the ecosystem, but in this tiny closed aquarium, it's not necessarily something I recommend. It does generally lead to higher levels of algae to be dealt with and stuff like that, so I do recommend removing any of this stuff that is, you know, breaking down below. The final plant in the video here is the Pothos erectus, which is a plant that I've been maintaining for quite a few iterations of this tank. I definitely have had it in here for quite a long time. It will definitely grow all the way up to the top of the tank, stifle itself out, and as you can see, down at the bottom here, the stem will actually lose all of its leaves and just become a spindly little stem with nothing on it. It's a little bit weird looking. I actually do have to pull this plant out mostly. Some of them I will leave in and trim, but most of the plant does actually have to get pulled out and replant the tops. I pulled out about 25 stems and I'm replanting probably 16 to 19, something like that. I took some other ones and put them in a different tank just to hold, as I'm going to be passing those off to a super secret squirrel later on. A very simple plant that I've been dealing with for quite a long time. I did a feature video on this a while ago if you want to check that out too. But in the meantime, as you can see, the water is totally clouded out. We're having a little bit of a mess here, but don't worry, it'll be filtered out and be clear as day tomorrow. No problems whatsoever. This runs us through sort of the tall center of the tank, and stay tuned later on for some videos on the rest of all of the amounts of plants in this tank. It's getting pretty extensive, so stay tuned. We're going to continue doing work on this. Thank you very much for tuning in. Subscribe, smash buttons, do all that kind of stuff. And I'd like to give a big shout out to Mikey Fishy for becoming a long-term patronizer and giving us a whole year's worth of subscription. Thank you very much. If you want to help content like this and you want to fund it, you can. Head over to the Patreon, or you don't even have to leave YouTube anymore. You can hit the join button down below, and you can even do 3 months on YouTube now, I think, something like that. But thanks. I'm going to talk to you later. Giant spider is making a giant nest somewhere, and spiders are going to come out and probably get my eyes. I don't know. I haven't seen the giant spider in a long time. It's coming up on winter, so probably nesting somewhere.